Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our latest episode of Agile Insights Conversation. My guest today is Petra Wille, and Petra will shortly introduce herself. I got to know her through two friends of mine. One is Oliver Winter, a product coach in Germany who has been talking to me about Petra for a long time, and he was like, you should meet her, you should meet her. And then last time when I talked to Marty Kagan as part of our conversations, he also mentioned Petra. So I said, now it's really time to reach out to Petra and get to know her. Petra, welcome to our show. I'm really delighted to talk to you today.
Good morning, Sohrab. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So Petra, I always find it weird to introduce other people. Previously, when we talked, you said you find it a bit easier if someone else introduces you. But as I didn't prepare an introduction for you, I would actually hand over the stage so that you can give a brief introduction about yourself. Please don't talk about your motivations of writing this excellent book, Strong Product People, because this is going to be a dedicated question.
Really cool. Yeah, sure. Let's do that. So what I'm currently doing, maybe that's the easiest to start with, is I'm a product leadership coach. So I have people in a leadership role managing and leading product organization and product folks to get better in what they do. And so ultimately, hopefully, the whole product organization gets better over time. So this is kind of what I'm currently doing. I'm focusing on the product leadership level the last 3 years. I always said 2 years, but I think I have to update it to 3 years now. I wrote a book about it. We will talk about it later. And the 4 to 5 years before that, I was really working with the individual contributor product manager in one-on-one coaching situations, mainly to help them further their craft. And that was sometimes just like super high level one-on-one monthly touch points, or really deep. We need to create a new strategy. Could you really just like come help us do that? So there was kind of all sorts of engagements. And I started my career pretty typical as a software developer some years back, and then slowly via project management and requirements engineering back at the days, I transitioned into the product management role at companies like SAP, which was rather a big one, and small startups that actually nobody knows about or knows of. So that was kind of my journey.
Yeah. So you've been in the product space now for how long, Petra?
More than 15 years.
More than 15 years. And you've been through the whole journey, being a product manager yourself,
Yeah.
Or actually being the developer, being the developer impacted by the product manager, then being the product manager, then being the product leader, coaching product managers, and now actually working more and more with product leaders themselves. So this is quite cool. Now, before we jump into the topic of your book and the motivation why you wrote it, as both of us are product people, what is your favorite product?
Ooh.
And don't tell me it's your iPhone or whatever. Like, what is like a product that probably a lot of people don't know about, but you really like?
Yeah, so two things. So I really love, so as a product person working on products, I really love complex, process heavy, mainly B2B software and tools. And so that's the products that I really like to wrap my head around. So if it's logistics or if it's fintech or all these kind of, so really process heavy stuff, that's the stuff that I always fell in love with and really love kind of find better, easier ways of doing things that are done for ages, for example. And then on the other hand, I love super simple products. There is a great book that is called Calm Technology. So really devices that are not screaming without a screen or something like this. And I just like brought one because that's a Tony box. That's what my daughter uses. Yeah. And that is a lovely piece of technology. So this actually is her audiobook, and it causes this thing to play whenever she wants it to play. So no screens, and a great device. So that is, for example, a product that I actually like.
Yeah, the Tony box is a great product. Two of my kids also had them. We recently sold them because they don't use them anymore. Now when they want when they want to listen to a podcast or something, they just use their iPhone and that works.
My daughter is 4, so
yeah. She'll get there. She'll get there sooner than later.
Sure.
Yeah. So my favorite product is also something that has no screen attached to it. It's a cooker. It's a special type of tap, like where you get your water out, and it can give you like regular water, it can give you boiling water, it can give you water with gas, and it can give you cold water. And all of that with a really simple like mechanism. It's brilliant, right? You don't think about the like technology products like being a tap.
Exactly.
I use it every day, multiple times, whether I'm making tea or noodles or whatever. I actually love it.
That sounds great. Maybe you should add it to the show notes so that we can buy it as well.
Yeah. No, but then people think I'm doing advertising for them, which is not the case.
No, it's just like a service announcement.
Maybe I'll do that. So now talking about your favorite product, what was your first product that you built? Because you mentioned you worked at multiple companies, large ones and smaller ones, but what was the first product that you were actually responsible for? And maybe it's even nothing that you got paid for. Maybe it's something that you did when you were a kid. I don't know. But...
yeah. So, yeah, that is a super interesting question. What was my first product? So maybe my first product was a website that I built 1996 or something like that, pretty early on, when I discovered that HTML is a thing and that I can actually be creative and build things. And it was a website for a youth hostel like thing. And they wanted to have a calendar where people can actually book their rooms and something like that. So that was an early on product. Not cool. The most beautiful one. But
it was 1996 after all, yeah?
Yeah, but it was the first thing I built.
Yeah, I mean, Craigslist still looks like being 1996.
That is true.
That is true. Yeah. So the first product that I built was, so when I was a kid, we had just come to Germany. My parents didn't have a lot of money, but I loved the game Monopoly. And I always played it in kindergarten and then later in Hort, which was the place we went after school. And my sister and I, we memorized every single one of the like roads and prices for hotels and everything. Like we memorized everything, and then we built our own version of Monopoly
online. Cool.
And because it was our own version, not even online, like really like with paper, everything.
Yeah.
And because it was our version of Monopoly, we called it Salimi. We still have that. I showed that a few years back to my kids. They were like, why did you build it? Why didn't you just buy it? I'm like, yeah, we didn't have the money. Yeah. We didn't have the money to buy it. But that was really cool. All right. So now that we've cleared this up, let's dive into the book. And I start with the question, what was the motivation for you to write this book? There are a ton of books in the product space, none of them in the thing that you're addressing, but what was your motivation to do this?
Repetition and scarcity, maybe. So one thing I really realized that I have to repeat the same concepts over and over again in my one-on-one coaching. So at some point I thought maybe I need to write a series of blog posts that then some of my coaches could read before we actually dive into these particular topics in the coaching sessions, because I found it such a waste of time to explain the basics in a more or less expensive 1 hour coaching session. So I thought it's maybe nicer if we do this flipped classroom approach. They read something up front and then we really think about how they could apply it in their situation, or if they have more questions to ask, we could clarify those ones, obviously. So that was one motivation for doing it. And at some point I realized, okay, a series of blog posts will not do the job. So it will be a bigger project, and there's so many things that we usually touch in the coaching session. So maybe it is a book in the end. And then that's how I started to think about it. And then I did a bit of research, how many books are out there on product leadership. And it was actually not that many. Empowered was not out at that point in time. Roman Pichler's book was not out at the time. So there were not so many product leadership books. And I thought, why not adding to that kind of niche? It is a super niche topic. I talk to publishers and it's not easy to convince them of publishing for such a niche audience, because it's product people leading product people in the technology, in the tech space, so to say. That's why I decided for self-publishing in the end, which was, I guess, a good idea. A lot of work, but a good idea. Gives me a lot of freedom to make my own promotion decisions and all these kind of things. Yeah, so that's why I finally decided to write that book.
Yeah. And did you actually write blog posts prior to that, so that the book became a compilation of those blog posts? Or after a few blog posts, you said, no, now I'm going to do the big thing. I'm going to write the book?
Yeah, no, I was always, so writing is a thing that I'm doing throughout my career. In the beginning, I was doing it for my own reflection and learning, and was not publishing any of the things that I wrote. And then at some point, I started to publish on a German product management blog, Produktbezogen, started to publish to the Mind the Product blog. So I was always writing, but none of the blog posts actually really made it into the book. So I started from scratch and really thought about didactically. So where to start, how to explain product leadership, what are the things that people need to know. And then in the process, I ultimately had to prioritize and focus on one aspect of product leadership. So I'm not talking about creating strategy or these kind of things. I'm mainly focused on the people development bit of leadership and the coaching aspect. And none of the blog posts made it to the book. Yeah, but I was writing a lot before I started writing the book.
Yeah, you sense that as a reader, that it's not your first time starting to write, because writing is also an art or a craft that you need to work on, and I got that sense absolutely. Now, I would just disagree with you on one thing, because you said it's niche and a niche and a niche, and then you said it's like only for the tech space. Because when I was reading that book and thinking about a lot of the organizations, a lot of the leaders that I work with, independent from whether they work in tech or not, even independent from whether they lead products or not, the people development piece of the thing that you cover in the book is so good. And we'll dive into this, because it really is helpful as any type of leader, especially product, and yes, especially tech, but even outside of like software, when you learn about the things that you cover, right? And if you only take out the principles and some of the tools, you already get some great value from that. So after making some advertising for the cooker product, now there was the advertising for Petra's book. For the book.
It's an advertising show.
It's an advertising show, yeah. And now you can sell it with a special deal. Now, let's go into one of the first things that you cover in the book. And this conversation, just to set expectations for everyone listening to it, is not going to be a summary of the book, but in some areas of the book, we will deep dive in, and then we will also cover some things that did not make it into the book. For example, communities of practice. So I want to start with one of the first chapters that you cover, and in that you talk about defining your good. For me, this was about setting standards. Now, why did you start with this specific topic, and can you explain a bit about it to our audience?
Yeah, because to some extent that is a big time saver to all the leadership folks out there. So if you are defining what makes a competent product manager, competent designer, competent developer, for example, in your given context, in your company's environment, that really helps you with all the other things that might follow, which is hiring, onboarding, personal development conversation, one-on-ones. And it needs to be written, so explicit. So you need to have a standard. You really need to reflect on, okay, what is my take on a competent product manager? And then there still can be a company's take, because a lot of companies have role definitions and role descriptions and use it for career conversations. Don't get me wrong, but I think it is important for each and every leader to take that, even if existing, and really reflect on it. Is that my take? And do I need to add to that list, for example? Because it makes so many performance and feedback sessions way easier to prepare if you really have your stance on what is your definition of a good, competent product person. That's why I started with that. And from there, the book unfolds, so to say, to look at the role from various angles. But I think this is kind of the starting point. And I created something that people could use so that they don't have to start with a blank sheet of paper.
Yeah.
But I always encourage them that they really need to come up with their own version and own definition of competency.
Yeah. And in the definition of competency, you basically, and correct me if I'm wrong, you cover three elements or three dimensions. One is the personality traits. The others is skills, know-how, etc. And the third one is values.
Yes.
Now, can you talk a bit about each of them? And then I would like to deep dive in the topic of values, because That is very uncommon if I think about all the organizations that I work with. It's not like they don't put any values out there, but I rarely see them assessing their people based on values, setting standards based on values. So, but let's start with personality traits and the skills first, and then get into values.
Yeah, so over the years, I came to the conclusion that there are some things that you have to check before you actually hire people. And not everybody can become a strong product manager. A lot of people can. It's not rocket science, we all know. It is something that you can learn, but there are some personality traits that are hard to build or to coach for if it's not something that the people are kind of bringing to the table. And that's why I always say, like, please reflect, leaders out there, reflect on what are these personality traits. And they may vary from company to company slightly. For me, for example, curiosity is something. If a person is not intrinsically curious about life and the world and about how all things are working together and is constantly learning just because of their curiosity, it's hard for them to become a product person, because you really have to deeply engage with people and be interested in their struggles and challenges and things they want to achieve in life in general. And I said, for example, if you work for a shipping logistics company, totally other industry than if you're working for, I don't know, a language learning app or things like that. So you should be curious, and that helps you to become a great product person. So curiosity is always something that I would try to find in people when I'm interviewing for a product role. And there are other ones, like I call it intellectual horsepower in the book. So they have to have a good CPU to some extent to process all the information that we always surrounded with, and these kind of things. So I have 6 personality traits described in the books. But it's, as said, it's just like, that's my 6, and I encourage people to find theirs as well. So what is important to you as a product leader to spot in people when you're interviewing. Once you hire them, then it is not such a helpful assessment, because then you're committed to your employees, right? And even if they're lacking maybe curiosity or something like this, that might be a trigger for finding another seat for them if they're struggling, or if they don't like the role. That could be one of the reasons why they don't like the role. But it's not something that I regularly use in assessing people. It's more of a thing that I try to use while hiring new product folks. And then the competencies and know-how, that is actually the biggest part to it. So I created something that I call the PM wheel.
Yes.
People interested can download it on my website. It's free. And it's actually 8 buckets. For example, understanding the problem and finding solutions and do some planning. And all of these things come with a lot of questions. So is the product person able to conduct user interviews? Is the product person aware of human biases and what that actually means for conducting interviews? So it's really precise questions that help me assess product people, and that people could use to actually start assessing their product folks. And that helps in the hiring process, in onboarding process, to set expectations. And it helps when having performance reviews, or sometimes even it helps as a self-assessment tool for the product people. So that's how a lot of people are using it. If they want to find their next, or the best next thing to learn, or the best next thing to get better at, so the next bigger challenge, then they sometimes use it to find this white spot, these gaps in their competency landscape, so to say. So that's what this part is for. Yeah, and then last but not least, it's the values. And one thing, so the easiest thing is if the company has company values, you could use those and inherit them. Or you think about, a lot of companies actually don't have, even if we think it's a thing, but a lot of companies that I meet don't have values that they put on a poster on the wall. So then really reflect what is the core of your product beliefs and product organization, and even in heavy weather and storm will not be changing for you as a group of people, so will remain true. And that is another important thing. So what makes us as human beings and as a group of people, what unites us to some extent. It's a bit of the glue to a product organization. That's why I think it deserves to be on that definition of good.
On the definition of good. I like that a lot. So you mentioned the PM wheel already. There's a bunch of tools. So for those of you who haven't read the book, there are a bunch of tools that are really pragmatic, and you can apply them directly to your daily work, either as a product manager, product owner, whatever, or as the person coaching them and working with them. And those things, there are a bunch of tools out there, but I found the ones that you mentioned, and I think some of them were you invented yourself or adapted from others. They are also very well integrated. So if you go through the book, you see that all the tools that you bring up, there is a good integration between them. So you don't have to use all of them, but you can use them if you want to and collectively.
Yeah, it's really a workbook.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you specifically mentioned this is not one of the books that you read from one cover to the other, but like you dive into specific sections that you believe are currently relevant to you. And that is actually
exactly.
How. Now, I read it from cover to cover because I wanted to prepare for this interview, but it's still a good travel guide in the future. Now, at the values piece, you gave a few examples around the personality traits, right? Like curiosity and the intellectual horsepower. What are things that in your past, and maybe with some organizations that you work with, you don't have to name them, but what are some areas or examples where you saw that the values from the organization and for the product and the person being in charge of the product, where they didn't like really well connect, where there were like problems, where challenges, and what was then the result of that?
The result of that always is friction to some extent. And it is slowing down speed of decision making often, because then people have first pause and I first of all identify, okay, this is because of conflicting values. So my view to the world is completely different than your view to the world, based on, and there's nothing wrong in this, right? So we have different backgrounds, different experiences, come out of different families and cultures and all these kind of things. And in some organization, it causes healthy friction. So then we're talking about diversity and all the good thing that it can actually bring. But still, the underlying values usually should point into the same direction. For example, that technology should not do harm to the world or something like that. Yeah. That is a value that some companies have and others don't. Others optimize more for the shareholder value or shorter term revenues. It's just like they have a different operating model. So diving into their values and what actually drives these decisions and these operating models, I think that is the interesting part. And it helps if you have understood this underlying concepts and values, especially again in hiring. Because if storms get rough and weather gets heavy, then that is what everything boils down to. And then it's easier to make decision in kind of a chaotic situation if everybody at least shares the same values, and then you don't have to discuss these basic things.
Yeah. So as a product leader, it then becomes specifically important to first assess whether your organization has set out some values in order to then also be able to assess people that you're hiring and then working with.
Yeah.
Now, you spend a fair amount of time on the topic of coaching. And a lot of people look at coaching very differently, and there are different coaching stances. I'd like to explore your perspective on that, and then also understand the importance of coaching capabilities in every product leader.
Yeah, that actually is a really good question, the definition of coaching. I published a blog post about the various coaches only in the world of product management. So even if you look at this small kind of planet, there are already many, many different flavors of coaching, so to say. The one that I try to use most is really this, not so much of giving advice and pointing people into the right direction. It's more of a passive, asking the right question at the right time way of coaching. But you have to be able to really adapt to the person you're currently coaching with, because sometimes all they need is a bit of advice here, or a bit of, hey, look, I have this 3 option, or I see these 3 options for you, even if the really passive coach would say like, okay, and tell me, what options do you see? And then it takes the people 1 or 2 hours to find these options. And sometimes you need to shortcut these things and say like, okay, look, I see these 3 options based on my experience from various companies and various backgrounds. And I think great coaches are able to navigate all these levels. So when do I really need to give advice? When do I need to help the people see their options? And when is it my time to just like really back off, let them do the work? Because that's what most of the change is happening if the people do the work. And it's not so much change happening if I constantly tell them what to do. So I always try to be a bit more laid back, asking the right question at the right time and let them do the work. But sometimes they just need a bit of advice or a bit of inspiration. So I try to navigate this really cautiously.
Yeah, no, I fully agree with you. And prior to our conversation, I emailed you that your perspective on a lot of things based on what I was reading in the book is very much aligned to how I see things. Because when I talk, now I teach, one of the courses that I teach is Agile leadership. Now, a lot of people think an Agile leader is just a pure coach, which I don't agree with, because normally a coach comes from the outside. They don't have any skin in the game. They don't have any responsibility within the organization. But I do think that every leader should have coaching capabilities.
Yes.
So that, as you mentioned, right, from time to time, given the situation, they can be more passive and more asking. You can actively ask, right? Or they can just go back and say, whenever you need me, just pull me in. But there are situations where you need to be the person who either lays out the options or maybe even takes the decisions, given the seniority, the experience of the person that you're working with, right? The time, or the criticality in terms of time, all of those things are super important. And what I try people to understand or get to is this: A, self-awareness. What is my default way of interacting?
Exactly.
And B, the situational awareness, right? What does this situation require of me? And then be able to basically deliver based on that specific situation. Now, when you work with product leaders or leaders in general, how do you help them become better at this, what I refer to as leadership agility, or your approach to coaching?
The answer is so simple. It's maybe even boring. So
I'm curious
thing
now.
Is, I allow them to do so. So that is the answer. In a lot of cases, in product especially, allowing people to do so, so allowing product people to struggle because the job is complex, really is liberating and helps them to have this kind of breeze of fresh air and then reconsider their situation. Same applies for product leads. You need to allow them to start wrapping their heads around coaching, allow them to learn this kind of skill, and then they need to realize that they need to make a bit of room in their busy schedule to become a coach. Because for becoming a coach, you need the headspace. You need the time to think about this one particular person and how you could actually currently help them best. And maybe, as you were saying, maybe you're talking to a rather junior product person, and then you want to take the decision for them maybe, but help them understand how you actually came to your conclusion. So I think that is important. And often product leaders are in a really firefighting, reactive mode, and they have to actually step back and at least some time in a busy calendar dedicate to this. Okay, pause. Where are we currently? I need to be the one pulling out a bit and see what everybody needs at the given point in time. How could I help them best? And it's not always a 2-hour coaching session. Sometimes it's just like one question while you're actually walking through the water cooler, or these times a virtual coffee machine. But that is actually what is needed. So they need to allow themselves to become a coach, and then they need to realize why that makes sense and how to make a bit of time in their busy schedule. And it helps if they have some books at hand, some resources that actually just like help them get going. Because coaching is not, a lot of people think like I cannot do any coaching because I haven't got a formal coaching degree, but that's not what it actually takes. It just like, it takes the power of the right question at the right time. And I think everybody could get better at that. And then navigating this, should I give advice? Should I offer opportunities? Should I just like ask the right question? And once that is understood, I think it's easy to kind of use it in your day-to-day work.
Yeah, I fully agree with that. So last year, I spoke to Michael Bongay-Stanier, and he's like a very good coach. And his definition
awesome books, by the way.
Awesome books, awesome books. His definition of coaching was staying curious a bit longer. And that summarizes it so well, right? Because when you're curious, you ask questions, right? When you're curious, you never give answers. So you ask questions, you explore what the person is going through, what their perspective is. And just sometimes by asking these questions, you already help them.
Yeah,
right?
Exactly.
I remember like 20 years, 25 years ago, when I was teaching math to my little sister, right? I just asked her, I'm like, so how do you get there? How do you get to, what do you do here? And then she's like, now I get it. Now I solved it. So staying curious a bit longer. You don't need a coaching degree, but be aware to stay curious. Yeah, I like that a lot. All right. So this coaching piece. Now, when someone is a product leader and you look at their schedule, what percentage of their time, and I'm sure you get that question, and that's why I'm asking it as well. What percentage of their time do you see a good product leader spending in coaching? And what do they usually coach their product managers on? Is it mainly the key product manager skills like prioritizing and stakeholder management? Or do you also see a lot of coaching in the space of like conflict navigation and so on and so forth?
So regarding the time investment, that is super hard or impossible to answer because it really depends on the current state of the product organization and company. If it's a startup that's searching for product market fit, there is no product strategy, then the product lead usually invests most of their time into finding this directional clarity, coming up with a strategy, all these kind of things. And the team is not that big. So the time they invest in coaching is rather small. If it's larger organizations, then it is really heavy on the calendars, especially the hiring and onboarding, the people development, the annual reviews, or hopefully quarterly or even more often, feedback sessions, all these kind of things. So then it can take up to, I don't know, I even saw people doing 50% of their work only because having too many direct reports. That's another problem, by the way. Too many product leads have too many direct reports. But so it is impossible to answer that question. What I usually say, you can look at it from an employee perspective. And I think they should have the airtime of at least a solid hour on a bi-weekly cadence with their line manager, or if they have a strong community of practice, some things can happen there, which we get to. So they need to have peers to talk to, because we know, right? Daniel Pink, autonomy, mastery, and purpose. That's what people are thriving for. And they tend to stay with our company if they're improving on all those three. So if they really can work in an autonomous way with the teams and setting their own agenda to some extent, then mastery is getting better at their craft. And that is what a product leader could trigger. And it's not that they need like lengthy conversations with the product leader. Sometimes it's a bit of budget. Sometimes it's a book club, which is a super cheap thing. And not enough companies are doing this. So go get 10 copies of Continuous Discovery Habits. Hi, Teresa. And then just like hold your book club with your team, because that helps you learn new things and hear what colleagues are thinking, helps you in team building, all that kind of things. So it's not work harder, it's really work smarter, and that applies to the product leadership, people development bit as well, right? So get creative, involve the team. I think that is kind of the trick here. And then what was the second part of your question?
It was, what type of topics do the product leaders spend coaching mostly on? Is it like the key product manager skills, or also other things like the human skills?
Yeah, so it's actually a lot of the typical product management things, but what I see having more impact is really storytelling, managing conflict, expressing emotions and needs to the rest of the team, reflecting, taking a pause, where are we currently at? So all these kind of things usually have the bigger impact, so to say.
Yeah.
But a lot of coaching needs to happen on the, okay, that's how prioritization works in our company, or that's how we set up the discovery environments, and that's the people you should actually be talking to. So it's a lot of helping people to navigate the company, helping people to navigate how actually the product process actually looks, and the cadence and the rhythm. But the other topics usually have more impact in the long run for most of the product people.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with that. Now, a few things based on what you mentioned. On having too many direct reports, that can also have a benefit, because then you cannot micromanage them.
That's true.
Which is quite cool. And some organizations make particular use of that. And regarding Teresa, I'll speak to Teresa as part of this Agile Insights conversations in April. That's going to be cool. Now, I want to elaborate a bit more on the skills that are not the key product manager skills, right? The hard skills and the soft skills. Do you see product leaders having or engaging with other coaches that can help the product manager become better at conflict navigation, etc.? Because maybe those are things that the product leader is not as good as themselves, right? I mean, nobody can do everything really well. So what's your perspective on that?
No, not enough. So I think, first of all, again, communities of practice. So they're always product people. If the product organization has a certain size, let's say like 5 to 6 people, and then, or bigger, then you already have this kind of one person really is interesting storytelling, and the better storytelling creates great presentations. So everybody could learn from them. The beauty in that is usually people that are good in storytelling naturally never reflected on how they're actually doing it and how they could actually help others do the same thing didactically. So that helps them to get better, and it helps the others to get better, but it is a time investment. So I totally understand that. And if you already have worked with these things, so within your product organization, you have worked on the storytelling with some colleagues, or you have worked on other soft skill things. For example, nonviolent communication is something usually I find an expert in that in a product organization, somebody just like because of their part of another organization out of their job, have had a training in nonviolent communication, and that could be super beneficial for product organization. So go find those people, and you could make use of what they already know, and them making them a teacher helps them to become even better. So that is a nice thing. But once that is done and you work with all these capabilities, it makes sense to get a bit of input from the outside world here and there. And I would actually love to see companies working more with external coaches on particular topics. It's even if you would ask all product folks if they ever got formal training in storytelling and giving presentations, it maybe is 20%, and most of them say like, yeah, but it was a pre-recorded masterclass about how to use PowerPoint somewhere. So not something that really made a difference for them. And some stuff is just like formal training. Other things is really like being challenged, being coached on one particular skill. And I think it would be beneficial for the whole organization to do this every once in a while, but only if they then take it and run with it to some extent. So learning never stops at the end of the training. Then again, a community should kick in and they should share what they learned while applying these methodologies. So plan time for people to apply the things that they learn in training and coaching. That's, I think, an important thing.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing is that, and that's maybe also already my interpretation, is that if you as a product leader, based on your capacity, but also based on your own capabilities, cannot do the coaching, the development in all areas relevant, and it's a lot of areas where people need to develop in order to become great product managers, create structures that can help people on board on that really like also sustainable journey. It's not like I send you to a training for a day, right? And then you come back and you already know everything, but like create a structure where this can happen sustainably. And the community of practice, we need a certain size, but maybe if you don't have that size internally, you can pair up with another
Yes,
organization, and together you create a cross-organization community of practice,
even
right?
better.
And people, exactly, right? They get like completely different perspectives, and they can learn. Now, when we talk about communities of practice, and we wanted to dive into this a bit more, what are the key things from your perspective that a product leader or maybe someone else can put into place that this community really becomes a living organism, right?
That is my learning goal for 2022, so to say. So I have a take on that because I help various clients to start and run a community of practice, because usually when I don't see there is a community of practice desert, so to say, when I actually coaching them, I strongly encourage them to start a community of practice, and then they do. So I have a bit of experience. It's more like anecdotal, and it's maybe like 5 or 6 companies I was helping in total to kick that off. And I'm observing several other ones over the years, how they are actually doing it, that have like vibrant communities of product practice. Plus, I'm to some extent part of the Mind the Product community. So I see how the external community is actually something that could be beneficial as well. So there is no knowledge about that, but I want to understand it more systematically this year. So I'm really dedicating a lot of time to talk to people that think they have a community of practice, what works well for them, formats and rituals and all these kind of things. And currently it looks like, so one super important thing is really leadership buy-in, granting the people the time to do so. So because communities of practice where people constantly have to invest their after work hours to actually run the community of practice are usually not something that is successful over a longer period of time. So first of all, grant them, the work hours to dedicate to their community of practice. And then it needs a bit of a rhythm and cadence. So that is something, and formats that work well for your particular community of practice. And for some, it is really, we just have brown bagging sessions where we actually look at our data dashboards, just that we have a protected time slot where we actually do so. Everybody looks at their products dashboard and really dives deep into the data. And then the last 20 minutes of this session, we share what we learned today. So for some, that is enough. Others really focus on the onboarding and personal development bit. Other ones really like to have peer review sessions. So where, hey, look, that's the new product strategy that I created. Could you just like poke holes into it? So I think this is really what is the purpose of the community of practice. And it is not the leader that should be driving it actively. So the content and the rhythm and the formats, that I think is something that actually the participants should drive and decide on and see what works for them. But a bit of budget helps because
Absolutely.
maybe sometimes it's nice to bring an external speaker to bring a bit of inspiration, or the book clubs or something like this could be part of a community of practice as well. So I think it's granting people to do it in work hours, plus a bit of budget, plus really kind of being outspoken of, I want you to share your learnings and help others to get better in what they do. I think this is the crucial bits at the moment. Let's see if I learn better throughout the year.
No, I can actually like put my signature under every single point that you mentioned, because working with the clients that I've worked with, what I see most happening is communities of practice are not taken seriously on the leadership level, and then they lack the time commitment or availability. They lack any budgets, etc. Like even if you want to get books, right? It's ridiculous. In some organizations, it's difficult for an employee to buy a book that costs like 10 to 20 euros. This is really ridiculous. Like if you want, and I always tell people, like if you want your organization to become agile, for me, the key to agility is the ability to learn, right? Whether you're learning about your customers' preferences or whether you're learning about how you can technically implement something, it's all about learning. There is no cheaper way to learn than reading a book.
Exactly.
Right? And if people are motivated,
maybe blog posts, but
maybe blog posts, right? But even then you need to give them the time to do it, because you cannot expect as an organization that people always put in their free time, the time that they have with their kids, with their family, with like whomever, like even if they don't have kids and family, like just for themselves with their hobbies, that is their free time. And if you expect them to do all of that outside of work, then at some point they
that
will
will
look for
happen.
another employer. That's very rational thing to do as an employee. So I think that's I can actually really put my signature under everything that you mentioned. So what I take from this community is like, as a leader, be aware that communities are a great way to learn, and they are. They distribute learning or decentralize learning from you. They take a lot of work off your shoulders.
Yes, it's a time
as a product leader. It's a time saver so that you can do a bit more of that strategy and all of that, right? And dive and like do your one-on-ones with people on dedicated topics. B, it increases motivation a lot. And compared to a lot of other things organizations do, it is actually fairly cheap.
Yeah,
right? If you connect it with
cheap.
a book club, or even if you bring an outside speaker, I see so many people. So when I get invited, I tell my clients, I'm like, don't worry even about it. We don't have to go to procurement. I just do it. I come for an hour and we speak, and I can give you a presentation or whatever. It's an investment into our long-term client relationship. Right? So it is cheap for the customer. Now, one thing that I would like to add based on my own experience is that I like communities where there is someone, and it doesn't have to be the leader, fully agree with you, that has a plan for that community.
Yes,
right?
Totally agree.
There are ad hoc sessions where we talk about things that came up, etc. But I like there to be some kind of development backlog. Right? So what are we come so that people come prepared, like different people can like prepare sessions, etc. And that again requires time and resources and all of that. So if you have someone leading the community, or even multiple people, given how big it is, like you also need to make sure that they can spend time on it. The community itself becomes a product, and every product needs someone to take care of it.
Exactly. Yeah. So that was actually what we did with the customers last year. So we helped them create this. There was an organization of about 250 product people, 25 product leads. So it was a larger product organization. And they installed 3 to 4 people that were actually looking over the community of practice, and that everybody is sharing and caring and all these kind of things. So that was the ratio, and they worked pretty well.
Yeah. And it's a great way to learn. So we're getting to the end of our conversation. And I asked you earlier this morning, yesterday was International Women's Day. Now, Indeed, right? And I want to spend a few minutes, like the final minutes of our conversation, to talk about your experience as a woman in product. You've been in the space for 15 to 20 years. You started out as a software developer where not a lot of women were in software development. So my assumption is, and you correct me if I'm wrong, that in most scenarios where you were working, it was mainly man-driven. You still managed to like build a great career and all of that. Like, so what was your experience, and what would you tell younger women? Again, not saying that you're old. What would you tell? What would you say? What would you say to people that are just starting their career? Even younger, especially in the space of product, right? What would be your advice to them?
Yeah. So the system still. I'm big in feminism. I was publishing that are the books that you should be reading if you want to dive into this topic. And I think, by the way, everybody should read some of those books, not only women, by the way. So we need allies to eradicate some of the gender pay gap and all these kind of things. So I was experiencing all these downsides of being the only women in the workplace to some extent. And I think I would not have made it that far without mentors along the way. So, and there was male and female mentors. So it's not that it always took a man to pull me up or something like that. That is not the case. But I think it is really important to find people that actually believe in you and help you believe in yourself to some extent, and that you can actually really do it. So that is an important thing. And then I think we just have to demystify the whole tech jobs to some extent, because it's not that female brains are not, it's impossible for us to think about a lot of this tech stuff. It is not, and empathy is an important thing to have, and storytelling is often something that women just practice more, and that is a great skill to bring to the table. And as said, with all the diversity topics, I really think every team benefits from diversity in all sorts and forms, because it helps us to build products for the world and not only for our small niche market. So I think that is a super important thing. And go finding a mentor. And for those ones who are in a position they can support and pull up others, please do so. Give a shout out to the women that you like, or to people of color, and all these kind of other groups that still need help and are still kind of discriminated by the system we all live in. And maybe one thing, so one really practical thing is, if you kind of in the majority group of people, so to say, then just like call out things like, I'm a conference organizer, for example, for Mind the Product Engage here in Hamburg. And a lot of male speakers really tell us that they only come speak at our conference if we try at least get to a 30% women on stage ratio or something like that. And that is allyship, and that really forces event organizers to come to that kind of at least 30% women on stage. We always try to do 50-50 on all sorts of kind of buckets, but it's not easy. It is a lot of time investment that we have to bring, but it really helps if male speakers, for example, force us to do so and force us to reconsider our choices. So just like be an ally, and these small things really make a big difference in the end.
Yeah, I love that. There's a lot of things that, so this final piece that you mentioned, right? Asking conference organizers to have at least a certain percentage of female speakers. This is something that I will take away with me, but I can fully agree on the mentor thing. Being a minority myself in this country, I had great mentors, and you don't need to have one. You can have multiple, and those mentors can change over time. And sometimes it's a more formal mentor-mentee relationship, and sometimes it's an informal, like you just reach out to them and you ask them questions. And I have rarely, I think never seen someone that said, no, Sohrab, I don't want to help you. Every time I reached out, people were willing to help. Sometimes they didn't have the time, and then they said, come back a bit later. But every time,
Exactly.
even people that I never knew. I mean, I reached out to, we didn't know each other. I think I interacted with you through LinkedIn. Yeah. And immediately, right, we built that connection and we decided to do this. And exactly. I think if you ask questions and if you reach out to people, there are a lot of good people out there that are willing to support us.
Exactly.
Petra, thank you so much for this conversation. I so enjoyed it. And I have another topic here, which is about culture. We'll tackle that maybe sometime in the future.
Yes, happy to do that.
All right. Have a wonderful day, Petra.
Sohrab, thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.